Hey everyone. Today I'm going to show you another completely homemade device, and I'm sure a lot of you will like it. Right from the start, I want to warn you that the design is relatively complex, but you can make it much simpler if you use ready-made Chinese modules. But we're not looking for the easy way out, so we're going to build everything from scratch with our own hands. My viewers have always been divided into two camps. When I showed things that were built completely from scratch by hand, there were always people who didn't understand why go through all that trouble when you could just buy a few modules, solder them together, and get the same result. And when the homemade project was made from ready-made modules, many criticized that anyone could do that, and you could always just buy a finished product anyway. It's much more interesting to make everything with your own hands, because that's the whole point of being a radio enthusiast. I completely agree with that last opinion. So today it's going to be long and complicated, but done well and with heart. Make yourself comfortable. Let's get started. And yes, the video title is not clickbait. Actually, I ran into such a tricky problem that I spent several hours trying to figure it out, but it turned out to be much more complicated than I could have imagined. And anyone could run into this. But I'll talk about that a little later. Many of us use all sorts of battery-powered power tools. Personally, I've already forgotten what it's like to use a corded tool, because in most cases, battery-powered tools are more than enough. Yes, batteries have a certain amount of runtime, but you can always have a powerful charger and a few spare batteries on hand. All my power tools are Chinese-made, but they use the Makita battery standard. I make the batteries myself. Yeah, it ends up being more expensive, but at least it's high quality and powerful. Lately, it's turned out that I have to work more and more often far from outlets, using portable equipment. The device we're going to assemble today will be useful for all tech enthusiasts. This device is basically an attachment for an 18-volt lithium battery from a power tool. It's a 3-in-1 or even 4-in-1 type of device. There's a soldering iron here, but not an ordinary one. It uses cartridge tips like the powerful 245s from GBC. Anyone who's worked with them will confirm that this is one of the best solutions out there today. It's powerful, heats up instantly, and can handle almost any task. There are also universal 210s and precision 115 cartridge tips, but I already have plenty of small portable soldering irons that use those cartridges. I don't have one with the powerful 245s though, so I decided to make it with those. The second device in our setup is a laboratory power supply, ranging from 1.25 to 30 volts with adjustable voltage and current. This stabilized power supply has indicators for operating modes and can easily be used as a charger. There's also a digital voltammeter. The next device is a power bank. There is a single symmetrical Type-C port which can be used to charge both smartphones and laptops. The output voltage on this port ranges from 5 to 20 volts. It supports smart, fast charging protocols, including power delivery. The same port also allows you to charge a power tool battery, since it is bidirectional. The maximum charging power is 45 watts. So this is a combined device that serves as a soldering station, or more precisely a thermal stabilizer, a laboratory power supply, a battery charger, and a standalone charging device for your gadgets, up to and including laptops. Now, let's take a look at how it's built. At the very beginning, I modeled the case for the future device. I'm new to this, so the case isn't perfect, but I managed to get what I wanted, more or less. The front panel has all the controls for the soldering iron and the laboratory power supply. There are a couple of separate switches for each device. The case consists of a base and a top cover. The case is printed from PLA plastic on my new Snapmaker U1 tool changer printer. This is the much talked about printer that's recently become really popular thanks to its high build quality and excellent print quality. And of course, it's a tool changer with 4 separate print heads. The printer is enclosed on all sides except the top. But there are plenty of dome-style models online that let you fully enclose the printer for printing with more complex materials. The nozzle temperature goes up to 300 degrees, the bed heats up to 100 degrees, and the print area is larger than competitors, 270 millimeters on all axes. Print speed is up to 300 millimeters per second, with movement speeds of 500 millimeters per second and accelerations up to 20,000 millimeters per second squared. The standard nozzle is 0.4 millimeters and made of stainless steel. You can also buy hardened steel nozzles separately. Each head is a full-fledged extruder with its own motor, feeder, and nozzle. Naturally, the extruder is of the direct drive type. The package contents are very generous. The manufacturer didn't skimp on anything. There are 4 spools of branded filament with RFID. The printer automatically recognizes the type and color of the spool if branded filament is used. There's automatic filament loading and unloading, AI-powered print monitoring, of course, auto-leveling, and full automatic calibration of everything that can be calibrated. The The printer, of course, is a Core XY type with carbon rails along the x-axis. It prints just excellently, and thanks to the tool changer technology, no matter how many material changes there are, the only waste we get is the purge tower and a tiny amount of plastic produced when switching spools. It also has a filament cleaning system for each print head and a small waste container. A camera, remote monitoring, and its own slicer based on Orca are of course included. You'll find a link to this marvel in the description. Meanwhile, the case has already been graded. PLA isn't the best choice for cases like this, but again, printing with ABS was risky since my printer isn't fully enclosed yet. And when it comes to PETG, my color options are limited, but I do have plenty of PLA in different colors and shades. As you can see, the print quality is excellent. All the labels came out well. For now, let's set the case aside and start looking at the schematic. Right now, you're looking at the circuit diagram. Yeah, it might look a bit complicated, but it's really not that bad. The first section is the soldering iron's temperature stabilizer. I'm not going to explain how it works since I already covered that in a dedicated video where I assembled a separate station. That's actually where this exact circuit comes from. If you're interested, you'll find the link in the description. I'll just say that the device doesn't use any complicated chips or microcontrollers. It's just a single dual operational amplifier, the LM358, and a P-channel power switch to control the heater. The 245 cartridges have the following pinout. There's a heater output, a thermocouple plus, and a middle point. That's the spot where the heater connects to the thermocouple. So there are only 3 pins in total. In our case, we're only using 2 of them, just like with T12 tips. By the way, nothing's stopping you from using T12 cartridges either. The design was originally developed specifically for T12s, and it will work perfectly with them. It's important to emphasize that this isn't just a temperature controller, but a true thermostabilizer with feedback and a very fast response to temperature changes. There's an indicator, LED, that lights up when the tip is heating up. Heating is done in pulses. The thermostabilizer turns the tube on. Then, during pauses when heating is off, data is taken from the thermocouple. If the tip is cooled down, the heating turns on again, and these processes happen very quickly. Technically, the thermostabilizer's power is quite high and almost unlocks the full potential of these excellent cartridges, but everything depends on the supply voltage. For maximum power, you need 24 volts. Here we have an average of 18, and as the battery discharges, the power will decrease. But believe me, this is more than enough for very comfortable soldering, even with large metal parts. The only thing you'll need to do is select the resistance of the specified resistor that sets the temperature limits. It's selected for a specific cartridge. The power switch stays almost cold during operation, and doesn't need any extra cooling. Next, the circuit includes a boost converter based on the UC3843 current mode PWM controller, which drives a powerful N-channel MOSFET. Basically, this is a standard step-up DC-DC voltage converter which outputs about 30 to 32 volts of DC voltage. You can set the required output voltage using the specified trimmer resistor. Next, this voltage is fed to the input of a buck voltage and current regulator based on the XL4015 chip. The laboratory power supply is built specifically on this chip. You could call these kinds of devices a lab power supply only with some stretch, but for field work it's actually a pretty good option. The maximum output current can reach up to 5 amps, and considering the maximum voltage of 30 volts, that's already 150 watts. I wouldn't recommend drawing that much power since the cooling conditions aren't ideal and it won't be able to run for long periods without overheating. The current and voltage indicator or volt amp meter is store-bought. Its current sensor is a shunt that's located on the stabilizer board. This same shunt is the main current measuring device for the stabilizer. This stabilizer circuit is a copy of the one used in that popular Chinese module. May it be cursed. But unlike the store-bought version, ours is built with extra durability, and thanks to the large copper pores on the board, this DIY version can handle high power for long periods without overheating much. Now, let me tell you how, thanks to our Chinese friends, I wasted several hours of my life searching for a problem that didn't exist. I assembled and started up the first 2 sections of the device without any issues, but the power supply just wouldn't work. There was absolutely no response. The output voltage was 0. Of course, I checked the assembly but didn't find any mistakes. I carefully checked the board again. No problems at all. I cleaned off the flux, examined the board under a microscope, checked all the connections and all the vias. I manually checked the resistance of every resistor, even though they all had code markings. Next, I figured the problem might be in the power section. I lifted some components, checked them, and replaced the inductor. At the very end, I replaced the microchip. First one, then a second, and then even a third. I desoldered the microchips from ready-made Chinese modules. I bought about 10 of them and used them for different projects. They work perfectly, so the problem clearly wasn't with them, or so I thought at first. These modules are completely new. Look, the microchips are clearly labeled XL4015. If you open the datasheet for them, you'll see that pin 1 is ground and pin 5 is the power supply. But in reality, on these boards, pin 5 is ground and pin 1 is the power supply. But that's not all. Pins 2 and 4 are also swapped. The only pin that's correct is the third one, which goes to the substrate and serves as the output. So tell me, how was I supposed to know about this? Almost all similar microchips have a similar pinout. I have some older modules with this exact microchip, and they match the modules from the new batch exactly. But the pinout and connection, according to the datasheet, are as they should be, and with these modules, you get this kind of trap. I suspect there was a defective batch of these microchips with mirrored pins, and some resourceful Chinese entrepreneurs bought them up, made a PCB for this pinout, and voila! Half a day of someone's life down the drain. Yeah, just so you know, the board on these modules is specifically made for the incorrect pinout, which only works with the original microchips. That's the kind of pitfall we're dealing with, friends. Be careful and learn from my mistakes. Besides these regulators, I also found a more powerful XL4016, though it's in a DIP package. In the end, it was the 4016 with the trimmed substrate that went into the finished build. Its pinout matches that of the 4015 regulator. The printed circuit board. I'll say right away that it's double-sided and made at home. The second side is mostly large copper pores for heat dissipation. After making the PCB, I tinned it. Tinning protects against oxidation, and the board ends up looking nice and shiny, like a mirror. There are through holes. They were made using the classic homemade method. Basically, pieces of wire are soldered tightly from both sides, and there you have your Haya. Of course, chemical metallization of the holes looks more professional, but it involves a lot of harsh chemicals. Almost all the components are SMD, so I wouldn't have to drill a bunch of holes. Of course, in the description there will be a complete project archive with PDF files of the PCB, so anyone can replicate it. On the PCB, there are several resistors labeled as 0 ohms. These are actually just jumpers. After the final assembly, you'll also need to make this connection with a regular wire. There shouldn't be any problems with assembly since I've labeled all the components. By the way, some components on the schematic and on the board might be different. Some components on the board might be missing from the schematic, but either version works well. If you plan to build this yourself, I highly recommend using my PCB from the archive, since it's been tested and is fully functional. The power bank module. A pretty good power bank board based on the IP2369 chip is used here. It can provide 45 watts both for charging the battery and for charging your gadgets. A bidirectional or symmetrical Type-C connector, which can provide up to 20 volts depending on the device, and that's enough even to charge laptops. The board is smart and provides the correct charging method for the power tool battery, but it's important to understand that it doesn't have a BMS function and won't disconnect the battery in case of overcharge or overheating. In our case, the battery itself has a BMS board, but it's not symmetrical, and there's a separate port for charging, which in our case is not used. Nevertheless, this board cannot overcharge the battery if it is initially set up correctly. We set the battery type to a lithium-ion and the number of cells in series to 5 using jumpers. Although again, in our specific case, we are charging bypassing the BMS, but in practice, normal operation has shown that there won't be any problems. So each unit is assembled and started up separately. First, I recommend assembling and testing the soldering iron's temperature stabilizer. It's important not to mix up the polarity when connecting the thermocouple, otherwise nothing will work and you might burn out the tip. Next, assemble the step-up DC-DC converter. When starting it up, it's best if the components of the XL4015 stabilizer are not installed to ensure the step-up converter starts and is tested correctly. Finally, assemble and test the step-down voltage regulator. And at the very end, the board is cleaned of any flux residue. And with that, almost everything is ready. Now, regarding compatibility with 18-volt batteries from power tools, obviously, we're talking about lithium batteries here. Keep in mind that some original batteries from top manufacturers, for example Makita, do not have a full-fledged BMS board that would disconnect the battery if necessary. In contrast, almost all Chinese tools come with such a board. Some batteries have better boards, others worse, but overall these boards provide protection against overcharging, deep discharge, and short circuits, and in some cases even overheating. Our homemade device is powered by an equally homemade battery with a full-fledged BMS board. If the battery's discharged, the BMS will cut off the output, making it impossible to drain the battery to zero. But with original batteries, be extremely careful, since they lack this kind of protection. Yes, it probably would have been a good idea to add simple battery discharge protection, but again, if the battery has a full-fledged BMS inside, everything will work perfectly. Assembly. The case has all the mounts and slots you need, so there's no need to come up with anything yourself. It can be assembled in literally half an hour. There are a couple of switches. The first one turns on the soldering iron, the second one powers the lab power supply. Naturally, they can work either separately or together. There are three main controls, the soldering iron temperature control, as well as the current and voltage controls for the power supply. They are placed on the front panel. And a couple of terminals? That's the output of the power supply. The battery connector block is also 3D printed, but the socket itself is store-bought, though if you want, you can make it yourself too. The finished build isn't exactly compact, but there are a lot of controls, a voltammeter, and in any case, it wouldn't have been possible to make it very compact. It works perfectly and will be useful. Personally, I'm really glad to add another handy gadget to my collection. That's the end of this video. Let me remind you that the best way to support the channel is by leaving a comment with your support or constructive criticism. And don't forget to give the video a rating if you found it helpful. As always, you can download the full project archive for free using the link in the description. That's all from me for now. As always, this was Cassian aka with you, and see you next time. Bye.